Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the channel. Today I'm super excited because my 2017 Sierra is now dropped. I'm going to show you in this video how I did it, the components I used, and stay tuned at the end because I'm going to talk about some of the things I like and dislike about this new kit that I used. So let's get started. Alright guys, I want to show you the kit that I'm using. So this kit comes from IHC. I have never used them before. I've used DJM, I've used Beltec, I've used McGoy's. But this is the first time I've used this kit, and I wanted to try it because it gives you a way better angle on your front tire. So no more camber. You know, there's always a camber issue when you use the other components. That's their kind of claim to fame here, is they do not have any front camber, so you can get the wheel nice and straight in the front. So how it obtains the drop is it has upper and lower control arms, and it allows the strut to set lower in the pocket. So that gets you your front drop. Now this is adjustable from 4 to 6 inches, and you have these spacers depending on how low you want to go in the front. And then in the back, it uses your standard flip kit, so it comes with saddles and everything you need. You do reuse your old U-bolts. The front also comes with new stabilizer end links. The back comes with shocks, and then if you want to only do a 6-inch drop in the back, it has a 1-inch lift shackle. So we're going to be putting this kit in, and we're going to see how it goes. Like I said, I've never used this kit before, but I've used everything else. So I wanted to try this. It's been getting awesome reviews. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to get this off the ground. So I've just got it barely off the ground enough to get the tire off. And then we need to take the ABS line out of the way just so we don't cut into it, because we are going to cut that bump stop off. You can push from that hole right there to help get the ABS line out of the way. Just make sure that you're not cutting into anything. I have the ABS line out of the way. I'm going to move it a little more, but ready to start cutting. All I'm using is a 4-inch grinding disc, 4.5-inch grinding disc on my DeWalt grinder. I'll list that in the description down below if you need a link to that. And then also you need to make sure that you protect your eyes. So I have a pair of goggles and a face shield. Better safe than sorry. I've been to the doctor twice after cutting stuff because I was lazy and didn't put something over my face or my eyes. So make sure that you do that. So now that we have that cut off, I'm going to switch over to a grinding disc, and I'm going to clean up a lot of what you see there. So that's the next step. Here's what it looks like all finished up. Got my ABS line hooked back up. As you can see in the video, I cut the front side and down the sides, and then I bend it out in order to cut the back side. Just gives you a little more access, but looks pretty decent. Next, we're going to move on to the flip kit. I told you needed to hook these back up when I got done with the notch, and the reason, or sorry, not the notch, but cutting the bump stop off. The reason I said that is I did that prior, and I wanted to drive it again, so I hooked these ABS lines back up. You need to unhook those again, and the very first thing we need to take apart before we can even do the flip kit is we have to take off the tow hitch. Now the tow hitch is in the way of this bottom hanger, so in order to get this bolt out, to get the spring out of the way, we've got to take this out, because as you can see, it's blocked. I can't get it out. So to take this out, you don't really need a lot. You need a 21 millimeter on these three, and there's 3 on both sides, and then there's a 18 millimeter up above, and then right above up here on the top side there's 2 13 millimeters. So take all of those out, and then we're going to get the hitch out of the way, the receiver hitch out of the way, and then we'll be able to start taking this apart. Now that we got the hitch out of the way, we now have access to this guy, and the next step I'm going to take actually is I'm going to take the shocks off. So you're going to need a 21 millimeter wrench on one side, a socket on the other, or whatever you got. 21 millimeters what takes that out. And I'm also going to take the U-bolts out, which are also 21 millimeter. Now I did support the rear end of the truck with a couple jack stands, because after you release all this stuff, the rear end obviously is going to want to move, so make sure that you do that. So now all the U-bolts are out of the way, and shocks are out of the way. The next step, I'm going to take this 13 millimeter out on the driver's side. That's for the e-brake line. I'm also going to take the 13 millimeter out on the bracket there on the center of the rear differential, and then there's two 13s up top here. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me the movement I need without putting too much pressure on the lines to get the axle on the top side. But let's do that first, and then after that I'm actually going to lower the rear end a little bit, and I'll show you why I'm doing that. The next step, we're going to clamp both sides of the leaf spring. You can either do this on or off the car. I'm leaving this one in place, so I'm going to reverse this center pin. Now this is a 15 millimeter, so loosen this up, turn it around and bring it through the other way. When you do that, you're going to take this top piece off, and then we'll tighten it back up. We reversed that pin, took the top plate off. Now we're ready to take the leaf spring loose. So on this side, we're just going to take the back loose, 21 millimeter in the back, and on the other side we're actually going to take it completely out. On this side we can't take it out because the gas tank's in the way of the bolt. I am going to loosen it a little so I can swing this leaf spring down, but on the other side I'm going to take the leaf spring completely out. 21 millimeter on the back side. So we got the passenger side leaf spring out of the truck. We need to reverse this pin, take this top plate off, and then we're going to move the rear end towards the passenger side as far as we can to swing the other leaf spring underneath, and then we can just put this one underneath once we're finished with that. So on this other side, you are going to have to take off this mud flap. So take this out of the way, and I'm actually going to take the liner out too, because I'm going to put airbag mounts in the back for the helper bags. So same tool, we'll take all of this out. Alright, so we got the axle on the top side of the leaf spring. What we had to do is slide it as far to the passenger side as you can get it, enough to swing this leaf spring on the bottom side. So it takes quite a bit. It's going to look like your brake lines are going to break. It does put a lot of pressure on them. Just try to get them as far over as you can. It does help if you have a second person. I had somebody helping me, and we've got it up where it needs to be. Now we need to put the other leaf spring in. So this leaf spring just needs to go on the bottom side, and we'll start to bolt things together, and then we'll move on to the saddles. Right, so the next step before I actually put the saddles in and bolt the rear end down is I'm going to put the airbag bracket on. Now this just sandwiches around the frame, and there's a plate that goes in the back side. There's only 4 bolts. Now if you notice, I took the liner out, and that's to make access to this easier. You can do it with the liner in, but it's way harder, so the best thing to do is take the liner out. Once we get this in, then the leaf spring, we're going to mount the saddle to the leaf spring and the airbag, the base of the airbag down below. So let's get this tightened up. So now that the airbag brackets are mounted, we can slide the actual airbag assembly onto the leaf spring. It's going to go over that stud that we reversed, and then the saddle, of course, is going to go on the top side of that. So we'll get that all put in together, drop the rear end down, and then we're going to put the U-bolts on and the top plate that holds the U-bolts, and we'll tighten all that down, or at least snug it up. Actually, we won't tighten it until later on. Okay, so now that we have the top plate on, the U-bolts snugged up, make sure that that center pin is aligned on the saddle. Get it snug. Now I'm ready to hook up the airbag on the top side. There's just 2 bolts on each side, and I'm going to go ahead and put the 13 millimeter bolts that I took out to move the rear end back. So the one here, there's one on the top side of the differential, and then the 2 up top for the bracket. Now that we have all that tightened up, the top of the airbag mounts and the 13 millimeters for all the bracketry, we're going to put the shocks on. So the shock obviously goes back in the stock location. No need for a relocation kit on the shock because they're actually made for this type of drop. So we're going to put those in, use the same bolts, the factory bolts on the top and the bottom. Now we have the wheel back on, the shocks are snugged up, and all I have to do is tighten up all of the lower suspension components. So the shocks actually get torqued to 85 foot-pounds. The shackle nut on the front that we loosened on the front of the leaf spring is 148 foot-pounds. The one in the back, there's 2 separate ones. There's a hanger bolt and a leaf spring bolt. So the leaf spring, if you took this loose, if you took the leaf spring loose from the hanger, That one is 70 foot-pounds, and the bottom one, so the one that I actually loosened, I didn't loosen the top, is 37. So we're going to go through and torque all those to spec, and then I'm going to put the trailer hitch back on. Okay, the last thing we need to do after we torque all those things is torque the U-bolts. So the U-bolts need to go to 65 foot-pounds, and that's something that you need to check at 10 miles. You need to check it at 100 miles and at 1,000 miles. Just making sure to re-torque them because sometimes they work loose. So make sure you do that in a cross pattern. Don't have a ton of thread sticking out on one side and a little bit on the other side. Try to keep them as even as possible. Now the reason mine aren't even front to back is because of the airbag bracket. So that puts a little more in the back. But that's the last step, and then we'll move on to the front. Okay, so now we've moved to the front. The truck is off the ground, the wheel is off. Make sure that you've got it supported with some jack stands. But first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the ABS line loose. I'm also going to take the bottom of the strut loose with this 215 millimeters. I don't think I'm going to take the brake apart because I think it can all come at once. And then we're going to take off the upper and lower ball joints. So take off the nut off of both of those. Once you get that out of the way, you should be able to tap on the side and knock the ball joints loose in order to get the spindle out of the way. Okay, I got the spindle out of the way. Like I said, I left the brake on it. I did have to take out the sway bar end links and the tie rod end. So once those are out of the way and the spindle's out of the way, one of the things I noticed when I was putting the new A-arm in is that it's too big. So the ball joint's too big to come through the hole. I called IHC and they told me to ream the bottom of the hole out, that was fine. The other thing is there's a sleeve that's going to set on the bottom ball joint that goes around when you get the lower A-arm. There's a sleeve here, and that sleeve does need to go in to fill the rest of the hole. So I'm not super excited about having to do this. To me it should just fit, but that's part of maybe getting a good alignment and everything lining up, unlike the Beltec stuff. So anyway, we're going to move on. We're going to take out the upper and lower A-arms, which I'm pretty sure are a 24 millimeter. Get those bolts out of the way, get the new A-arms in, and start to tighten them up. So I have the old A-arm out of the way and the new one in. So the the top side of this is 21 millimeter, and the bottom is 18 and 24. So another thing I did have to do is I had to take apart or drop the strut out of the way. So there's just 3 18 millimeter bolts on the top side that you need to loosen in order to get the bolts out to put the new A-arm in. So we're going to start the reassembly process. Another thing is you do need to swing the sway bar down in order to get the bottom bolt out of the bottom A-arm. So we're ready to put the other A-arm in and start to put things back together, and then I'll talk about torque specs here in just a second. One thing I want you guys to take a note of is when you're putting the upper cams back in for the alignment, you're just going to put them right back in the same location that they came out. So you'll be able to see kind of a grease or dirt line where the old ones came out. So make sure that the centering pin comes through this exact same spot and the bolts are in the exact same position when you're putting it back together. That's on both sides. Make sure you put it back together the exact way it came apart. Now those get torqued while you have weight on the vehicle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and torque the strut, and the strut gets 37 foot-pounds on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to do that, and then the upper ball joint gets 37 foot-pounds, the bottom one gets 92. So I'm going to go ahead and do those three, and then we'll come back and talk about the next step. One other thing real quick, I wanted to tell you guys that I did not use any of the spacers that go underneath the strut. I'm going to set the truck down with no spacers in and kind of see where it sets, and if I want to use these, you can always loosen those 15 millimeter bolts and excuse me, slide these in. Alright, so once we torque the top to 37 and the bottom to 92 on the ball joints, make sure that the new ball joints that come with these A-arms are supplied with a castle nut and a cotter pin. So make sure you put your cotter pins in at this point, and then we're going to hook up the outer tie rod. The outer tie rod gets torqued to 44 pound-feet or foot-pounds of torque. And then I'm going to put the sway bar end links in. The kit does come with new shorter sway bar end links. So after we hook this up and torque it to 44, put our cotter keys in, then we will put that stabilizer end link in. The tie rod is now tightened. The sway bar, the new sway bar end link is in, and you really don't have a torque spec on this. You don't want the center to be spinning, and then I kind of tighten it down until these balloon out just a little bit. You don't want to over tighten, but you can see how much thread's left on the top of mine. The next step is I'm going to tighten this 10 millimeter bolt that holds the ABS line. I'm also going to hook the ABS line back up. The new A-arm does not have a provision for the original 10 millimeter bolt that holds this line, the brake line and the ABS line. So I'm going to use a couple zip ties. I wish this kit did come with that provision, but it doesn't. So you do need to tie this up somehow. You don't want it moving around, but that's our next step. At this point, everything's snug, and we're ready to put the tire back on. Now, you're probably wondering why I didn't give you torque specs on the upper and lower control arms. Well, I'm going to, but the truck needs to have the suspension loaded, so what we're going to do is I'm going to put the wheels on, and I'm going to put some blocks under the wheels so I can still get under it, because I have a feeling it's going to be pretty low. But once we do that, then I will give you guys and show you what we're going to do and the torque specs on each one of the upper and lowers. But it looks like we're getting really close to wrapping up. The other thing before I put the wheel on, these trucks are coated with what feels like wax. It's really gooey black junk, and I got some of that on the rotor, and so I'm just going to take some brake clean and clean the rotor off just to make sure none of that gunks up my brake pads. So now that we have the suspension on, or all the weight on the suspension, I put some blocks under the tires. We need to torque the bottom control arm to 129 foot-pounds. Now we're going to torque the nut. Make sure you're not torquing the bolt. You need to torque the nut, and you need to do it on both sides, front and back, and that's, like I said, 129 foot-pounds. The top side is 140, and then if you notice, when you look at the front of my truck, the wheels are cambered, or not cambered, but towed out. So I am going to take a wrench and move my toe a little bit. I'm going to do that once I get it on the ground. I can reach up in there and get it, or should be able to anyway, and try to straighten that out before you go get it aligned. Alright, so as you can see, the truck looks a lot better, but I wanted to talk about a few things that I like and dislike about the kit. So first off, the kit is one of the best riding kits that I've ever had. So I took it on a 1,000-mile trip to Austin, Texas. Well, there and back was about 1,000 miles. About a week ago, the truck rode absolutely great. I will say that if you're going 7 inches in the back like I did, you probably need to notch it. I did put the airbags in, and that helps when they've got air in them. But when they've got the minimum amount, which is 5 pounds, it does tend to bottom out, which that's my fault, because I didn't really feel like notching the frame on this truck. It is a brand new truck. It didn't bother me to cut open or cut off the bump stops, but as far as actually notching the frame, just something I didn't feel comfortable doing on this truck. I would rather have a welded in notch as opposed to a bolt in notch. But other than that, like I said, it's the back, the flip kit is one of the best flip kits I've seen. It has one of the best geometries as far as drivetrain angle, the way it rides down the road. There's no vibration. It's absolutely a phenomenal kit. So some of the things I didn't like about it, however, is starting from the rear, and we'll go forward. On the rear shocks, they come with rubber bushing, and then there's a metal sleeve that presses into the bushing, which it is required that you use that, but that was one of the biggest time constraints and biggest time wastes that I had, was putting that together. It kept pushing the bushing out. Even when I used the press, it didn't want to go together. I did finally get it together, but that is one of my complaints. The next complaint on those rear shocks, they look like they've been painted with just an aerosol can. Not a real great job. Now the shock itself rides great. I don't have any complaints there, but as far as the quality of the paint job on the outside of the shocks, the bushing was all painted. It literally looked like it ran down a line and somebody spray painted it. On the front side,
My complaint is kind of on paint as well. I don't think they're powder coated. I'm pretty sure they're just spray painted. So it chipped up a lot when you're moving it around, or if you set it on something or something hits it, it seems to chip really easy. So a good powder coating would make this kit way better. Now for the ball joints, the upper ball joint and the lower ball joint, both I'm not really a big fan of. So the upper ball joint did require, there's a little lip inside the top of your spindle that you have to grind down in order to get the top ball joint to set properly. Now in my opinion, I'd rather just have the proper ball joint that fit in there. There's no issues with it wiggling around or anything, but it's just one extra step that you have to take. And I understand that this truck was designed for, or this kit was designed for multiple trucks, so chances are the ball joints are different depending on whether you have a stamped arm or an aluminum arm. But anyway, that's one extra step. You do have to whittle out that hole, and I used a Dremel to do that. So it wasn't a big deal, but it is an extra step that you have to take. And then the bottom comes with a sleeve. And I'm not a big fan of that. It is just a metal sleeve that the ball joint sets in order to give it the proper bite, essentially, inside of the bottom of the spindle. So another thing that I didn't really care for, but all in all, this kit is an absolute great kit. So I don't want to I'm not trying to be real picky, but in the same breath I am, because maybe the company that makes this kit will see this video and maybe make some of those changes. But anyway, like I said, the kit is a great kit, rides great. So my next question to you guys is, what do you think I should do for wheels? I've got a couple ideas. I think because I do daily drive this truck, I'm going to go with a 22-inch wheel. I was thinking of either a Texas Edition replica, which is what I had on my last truck. You can see here. Or a Dub Baller 22-inch satin wheel is what I'm looking for. So either one of those are the ones that I'm thinking, but if you guys have an idea of what you think would look good on this truck, please drop it in the comments down below. You can also contact me if you have any questions at twmotorsports@hotmail, or you can hit me up on Instagram. One other thing I want to talk about is after I installed this kit, literally like a week after I put this kit on, they came out with their own airbag setup. So haven't tried it, can't speak to it, but my McGoy's airbag setup worked really well on this truck. I'm sure that IHC's kit is just as good, but I did use a McGoy's kit on my truck. So, and then if you guys haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. I do videos like this all the time. The next update on this truck, it will have wheels on it, it will have window tint, so look for that, and thanks for watching.